Hey guys, tonight we begin with a topic a little less romantic and a lot more transactional. Medieval dating and marriage. Yes, even in a world without dating apps, dinner dates, or the concept that love should have anything to do with marriage, people still found ways to court, woo, and wed. And let me tell you, some of it was surprisingly sweet, some of it was utterly bizarre, all of it was deeply medieval. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe light a candle for that authentic medieval atmosphere. And let's step back in time to discover what it really meant to find love, or at least a decent marriage contract in the Middle Ages. The art of medieval flirtation. In a world where unmarried men and women were rarely left alone together, flirting became an art form of subtle signals, coded messages, and creative chaperoning workarounds. Medieval courtship wasn't about swiping right. It was about reading the room, interpreting glances, and hoping your intended could decode your carefully crafted hints before your parents married you off to someone else. Eye contact was the foundation of medieval flirtation, but it had to be deployed with surgical precision. Too little and you seemed uninterested. Too much and you were considered brazen, possibly immoral. The perfect medieval flirt could convey interest, availability, and virtue all in a single well-timed glance across a crowded great hall. It was like texting, but with your eyeballs and significantly higher stakes. Handkerchief drops were a classic move. A lady would accidentally drop her handkerchief near a gentleman she fancied, giving him the opportunity to retrieve it and return it with a gallant bow. This brief interaction allowed for eye contact, perhaps a word or two, and the exchange of a small token. The handkerchief itself might be embroidered with subtle symbols or scented with herbs, a kind of medieval business card that said, "I'm available and I have decent needlework skills." Dancing was one of the few socially acceptable ways for unmarried people to touch each other, making medieval dance floors hotbeds of romantic tension. The formal steps and patterns of medieval dances created opportunities for brief hand-holding, whispered conversations, and meaningful looks. A skilled dancer could convey volumes through the pressure of a hand during a turn or the length of eye contact during a bow. Gift-giving required elaborate subtlety. A young man might present a lady with flowers, but the type of flower mattered enormously. Roses meant passionate love, but could be scandalous if given too early in courtship. Violets suggested modesty and faithfulness. Herbs carried messages. Rosemary for remembrance, thyme for courage. Getting the flower code wrong could end a courtship before it began, or worse, send entirely the wrong message about your intentions. Music was another weapon in the medieval flirtation arsenal. A young man might compose songs for his beloved, or hire musicians to perform beneath her window. The lyrics had to be appropriately chaste while still conveying romantic interest, a delicate balance between passion and propriety. A well-chosen song could make a lady's heart flutter without making her reputation suffer. Letters were the ultimate expression of serious romantic intent, but they were also dangerous. In a world where most people couldn't read, Love letters required trusted intermediaries who might gossip, misdeliver messages, or worse, reveal the contents to disapproving parents. The letters themselves had to be carefully coded to avoid scandal if discovered. Medieval lovers developed elaborate systems of metaphor and symbolism that would have made poetry professors weep with joy. Religious festivals provided cover for romantic encounters. During May Day celebrations, harvest festivals, or Saints' Day observances, normal social rules relaxed slightly, allowing for more interaction between unmarried people. These events became opportunities for extended flirtation, with traditional games and dances providing excuses for conversation and contact that would be impossible in everyday life. The language of fans, though more developed in later periods, had medieval roots. A lady might use her fan to signal interest, availability, or rejection through specific movements and positions. Fanning quickly meant nervousness or excitement. Slow fanning suggested contemplation, and a closed fan pointed toward someone conveyed romantic interest. It was sign language for the romantically inclined. Even clothing became a flirtation tool. A lady might wear certain colors or styles to signal her availability and interests. A gentleman might adopt specific fashions or wear tokens that indicated his romantic status. Medieval people became experts at reading these sartorial signals, able to determine someone's romantic situation from across a crowded room just by observing their outfit choices. The economics of medieval romance. Medieval romance wasn't just about matters of the heart. It was serious business involving dowries, inheritances, political alliances, and economic calculations that would make modern financial planners dizzy. Love might have been lovely, but marriage was about money, and everyone knew it. Dowries were the foundation of the medieval marriage market. A young woman's dowry, the money, property, or goods her family provided to her husband upon marriage, determined her attractiveness as a potential wife far more than her personality, looks, or compatibility. Families began planning and saving for daughters' dowries from the moment of birth, treating them as long-term investments that would hopefully secure advantageous marriages. The dowry negotiation process was complex and often contentious. Families hired professional negotiators or relied on trusted friends to broker deals. The groom's family would assess the proposed dowry against the bride's age, beauty, family connections, and potential for childbearing. The bride's family would evaluate the groom's financial prospects, social status, and family reputation. It was like a medieval stock exchange where human beings were the commodities. Bride prices, where the groom's family paid the bride's family, existed alongside dowry systems in some regions and social classes. This created interesting market dynamics where desirable brides might command high prices, while less desirable matches might require significant dowries to attract suitors. The economics could get complicated when both systems operated simultaneously, leading to complex negotiations about who paid what to whom. Marriage contracts were detailed business documents that specified financial obligations, property rights, and inheritance arrangements. These contracts often ran to dozens of pages and covered everything from household expenses to what happened if the marriage produced no male heirs. Lawyers specialized in marriage law, and wealthy families employed teams of legal advisors to structure advantageous marriage agreements. Professional matchmakers operated thriving businesses in larger towns and cities. These medieval marriage brokers maintained detailed knowledge of available singles, their financial situations, and their family connections. They charged fees for successful matches and often worked with multiple families simultaneously, creating complex webs of potential romantic connections based primarily on economic compatibility. The timing of marriage proposals was often driven by economic cycles rather than emotional readiness. Families might delay marriages during bad harvest years when dowries would be smaller, or rush marriages during prosperous times when they could afford more generous settlements. Economic downturns could leave entire generations unmarried as families struggled to afford wedding expenses. Property inheritance laws created unique romantic pressures. Eldest sons who stood to inherit land and titles were highly sought after, but they also faced pressure to marry strategically to consolidate family holdings. Younger sons with smaller inheritances had fewer marriage options and might need to pursue careers in the church or military before they could afford wives. Women's economic situations were entirely dependent on their marital status and family wealth. Unmarried women had few options for independent income, making marriage an economic necessity rather than a romantic choice. Widows, however, sometimes found themselves with unprecedented economic freedom and became attractive marriage prospects because they controlled their own property. Debt could complicate romantic relationships in devastating ways. Families might arrange marriages specifically to pay off debts, using their children as collateral in financial arrangements. Young people might find themselves married to creditors' children or used as pawns in complex financial schemes that had nothing to do with their personal preferences. The medieval marriage market was subject to inflation, market crashes, and economic trends just like any other commodity market. Wars might create shortages of marriageable men, driving up bride prices. Plagues might decimate certain social classes, creating unusual romantic opportunities for survivors. Economic prosperity might lead to more elaborate wedding celebrations and higher dowry expectations. Courtly love, the medieval dating fantasy. While most medieval people dealt with the practical realities of arranged marriages and economic negotiations, the upper classes developed an elaborate romantic ideology called courtly love that was part dating philosophy, part literary movement, and part elaborate fantasy that bore little resemblance to actual medieval relationships. Courtly love originated in the courts of southern France and spread throughout medieval Europe through literature, music, and the social aspirations of the nobility. It promoted the radical idea that romantic love was ennobling, that suffering for love was virtuous, and that the beloved should be worshipped from afar with devotion that bordered on religious fervor. The rules of courtly love were complex and often contradictory. A true courtly lover should be completely devoted to one lady, preferably someone unattainable, often a married noblewoman of higher social rank. The love should be secret, passionate, and preferably unconsummated, as the suffering and longing were considered more spiritually valuable than actual fulfillment. Courtly lovers expressed their devotion through elaborate rituals and gestures. They might wear their beloved's colors in tournaments, compose poetry in her honor, or perform acts of valor to prove their worth. The lady was expected to remain distant and testing, setting challenges for her suitor to prove his devotion while maintaining her own virtue and reputation. The literature of courtly love created templates for romantic behavior that influenced actual courtship practices among the nobility. Young nobles read romances like Lancelot and Tristan and Isolde, and tried to model their own romantic pursuits on these fictional examples. This created interesting situations where people attempted to live out literary fantasies in real medieval courts. Courtly love tournaments became popular entertainment where knights could display their devotion to particular ladies through their performance in combat. Knights would dedicate their victories to their chosen ladies, wear their tokens, and seek their approval through displays of martial prowess. These events were part sporting competition, part romantic theater. The poetry and music of courtly love developed sophisticated symbolic languages for expressing romantic devotion. Troubadours and minnesingers composed elaborate songs that used natural metaphors, religious imagery, and classical references to convey romantic messages. Understanding these poetic codes became a mark of sophistication among the nobility. Eleanor of Aquitaine and other powerful noblewomen played crucial roles in developing and promoting courtly love culture. They hosted courts where poets and musicians could perform, where elaborate romantic games were played, and where the ideals of refined romantic behavior were cultivated and displayed. The contradictions between courtly love ideology and medieval marriage practices created considerable social tension. Young nobles were encouraged to pursue passionate, spiritual love affairs while also expected to make practical marriage alliances. This led to complex situations where people maintained both courtly love relationships and pragmatic marriages simultaneously. Courtly love influenced the development of medieval concepts of chivalry and gentlemanly behavior. The idea that men should protect and serve women, treat them with elaborate courtesy, and sublimate their physical desires into spiritual devotion became integrated into noble education and social expectations. The decline of courtly love began when its romantic idealism came into increasing conflict with religious teachings about marriage and the practical needs of medieval society. The Church criticized courtly love for promoting adultery and spiritual pride, while social changes made its elaborate rituals seem outdated and impractical. The role of parents and families. Medieval marriages were family affairs in the most literal sense. Parents didn't just approve of their children's romantic choices. They made them. The idea that young people should choose their own spouses based on personal attraction was not just impractical but potentially dangerous to family interests. Parental marriage strategies began early. Families started evaluating potential matches for their children almost from birth, considering factors like land holdings, political connections, family reputation, and future inheritance prospects. Noble families might negotiate marriage contracts for infants, securing advantageous alliances decades before the actual wedding would take place. Mothers often played crucial roles in marriage negotiations, particularly for daughters. They understood the marriage market intimately and had networks of relationships that could be leveraged to find suitable matches. Mothers evaluated potential daughters-in-law based on their ability to manage households, bear children, and maintain family honor. Fathers controlled the financial aspects of marriage negotiations. They determined dowry amounts, negotiated property settlements, and made the final decisions about acceptable suitors. A father's refusal could end any romantic relationship, regardless of the feelings of the people involved. Extended family members often had significant influence over marriage decisions. Uncles, aunts, and grandparents might have strong opinions about suitable matches and could use their influence to promote or prevent particular relationships. Family councils were sometimes convened to make major marriage decisions, particularly when significant property or political considerations were involved. Professional matchmakers worked closely with families to identify suitable partners and negotiate terms. These medieval marriage brokers understood family dynamics and could navigate complex negotiations between multiple parties. They often served as intermediaries when direct negotiations might be awkward or when families preferred to maintain some distance from the process. Young people had various strategies for influencing their parents' marriage choices. They might cultivate relationships with sympathetic relatives who could advocate for preferred matches. Some used emotional manipulation, threatening to enter religious life if forced into unwanted marriages. Others simply presented their parents with fait accompli situations that were difficult to reverse. Parental resistance to unwanted suitors could be fierce and creative. Families might send eligible children away to distant relatives, arrange alternative marriages quickly, or even use legal means to prevent unwanted relationships. Some parents threatened disinheritance or arranged hasty marriages to other parties to prevent undesirable matches. The church's involvement in marriage regulation sometimes created conflicts between parental authority and religious law. Canon law recognized marriages based on mutual consent, which could sometimes override parental objections. This created situations where young people might seek church support for marriages their families opposed. Sibling relationships were affected by family marriage strategies. Older children's marriages influenced younger siblings' prospects, as family resources and reputation could be enhanced or damaged by each successive match. Brothers and sisters sometimes competed for parental resources and attention in the marriage market. Family honor was considered more important than individual happiness in marriage decisions. Parents who allowed their children to make poor marriages faced social consequences that could affect the entire family's standing. This created enormous pressure to prioritize practical considerations over romantic feelings.
Medieval wedding preparations.
Planning a medieval wedding was like organizing a military campaign, a financial transaction, and a religious ceremony all at once. The complexity of medieval wedding preparations could consume months or even years, involving extended families, religious authorities, legal advisors, and entire communities. The engagement period was a formal legal status with specific rights and obligations. Engagement contracts specified the terms of the upcoming marriage, including financial arrangements, property transfers, and timeline expectations. Breaking an engagement required legal justification and could result in financial penalties or social disgrace. Wedding dress preparation was an enormous undertaking for wealthy families. Brides' wedding garments were often family heirlooms, passed down through generations and modified for each new bride. These dresses required months of work by skilled seamstresses and embroiderers, incorporating expensive fabrics, precious metals, and sometimes gemstones. Food preparation for wedding feasts began weeks before the ceremony. Large weddings might require slaughtering multiple animals, brewing special alesh and wines, and preparing elaborate dishes that showcased family wealth and status. Professional cooks might be hired, and extended family members would contribute their specialties to the celebration. Guest list management was both a social and political challenge. Wedding invitations carried significant meaning. Who was invited and where they were seated conveyed messages about family alliances, social status, and political relationships. Failing to invite important people could create lasting enemies, while inviting too many people could bankrupt the family. Religious preparations included counseling sessions with priests, arrangements for special masses, and sometimes pilgrimages or other spiritual activities to ensure divine blessing on the marriage. Some couples made special donations to churches or undertook religious penances to spiritually prepare for married life. Legal preparations involved finalizing marriage contracts, arranging property transfers, and ensuring all financial obligations were clearly specified. Lawyers might spend months negotiating complex terms, particularly when significant inheritances or business interests were involved. Housing arrangements required careful planning. Newly married couples might live with the husband's family, requiring modifications to existing living spaces. Wealthy families might construct new residences or renovate existing ones to accommodate the new household arrangements. Entertainment planning included hiring musicians, arranging for special performances, and organizing games and activities that would keep guests occupied throughout the extended celebration period. Wedding entertainments were opportunities to display family culture and sophistication. Gift coordination was complex, as families needed to track who was giving what to avoid duplication or embarrassment. Wedding gifts were often practical items needed for establishing a new household, but they also served as displays of the gift giver's wealth and relationship to the family. Weather contingency planning was crucial for weddings that included outdoor ceremonies or celebrations. Medieval families developed elaborate backup plans for rain, snow, or extreme weather that could disrupt carefully planned celebrations. The wedding day drama. Medieval wedding days were elaborate productions that could last for days and involved entire communities. These weren't intimate ceremonies. They were public spectacles designed to demonstrate family wealth, confirm social alliances, and provide entertainment for everyone involved. Wedding day timing was carefully calculated based on religious calendars, agricultural cycles, and social considerations. Certain days were considered unlucky for marriages, while others were particularly auspicious. The Church prohibited marriages during Lent and other penitential periods, creating seasonal clustering of weddings during approved times. The bride's preparation ritual began before dawn with ceremonial bathing, hair arrangement, and dressing assisted by female relatives and servants. Each step had symbolic meaning. The bath represented purification. The hair arrangement showed her transition from maiden to wife, and the clothing displayed her family status and her own virtue. Processions to the church were carefully choreographed events. The bride's party would travel through the community, allowing everyone to see the wedding finery and participate in the celebration. These processions included musicians, flower throwers, and sometimes elaborate theatrical elements designed to entertain and impress observers. Church ceremonies varied by social class and region, but typically included exchanges of vows, rings, and sometimes other symbolic objects. The religious service was often brief compared to modern ceremonies, focusing on the essential legal and spiritual elements needed to create a valid marriage. The public nature of medieval weddings meant that the entire community witnessed and participated in the ceremony. This public observation served legal purposes. Community members could later testify that a valid marriage had taken place, which was important for inheritance and property rights. Post-ceremony celebrations began immediately and could continue for days. Wealthy families hosted elaborate feasts with multiple courses, entertainment, and generous hospitality for all guests. These celebrations were opportunities to display family prosperity and secure social relationships through shared enjoyment. Wedding night customs were surprisingly public affairs in some regions. Communities might engage in noisy celebrations outside the couple's dwelling, or even participate in rituals designed to ensure fertility and happiness in the marriage. Privacy, as we understand it, was not always expected or desired. Wedding day emergencies were common and required quick thinking. Weather problems, missing guests, food shortages, or family disputes could threaten carefully planned celebrations. Successful wedding organizers developed contingency plans and the ability to adapt quickly when things went wrong. Gift presentation ceremonies allowed guests to publicly display their generosity and relationship to the family. The value and appropriateness of gifts were carefully observed and remembered, as they reflected social hierarchies and alliance relationships that extended far beyond the wedding day itself. Religious blessing rituals might continue throughout the celebration, with priests offering special prayers at various points during the festivities. Some traditions included blessing the marriage bed, the couple's future home, or special objects that would be used in their married life. Marriage night mysteries and expectations. The medieval wedding night was surrounded by customs, expectations, and anxieties that reflected both the religious significance of marriage and the very practical concerns of families whose future fortunes depended on the success of the union. It was part sacred ritual, part family obligation, and part community spectacle. Preparation for the wedding night began with extensive instruction for married relatives, particularly mothers and aunts who shared practical advice about marital duties and expectations. These conversations covered everything from basic anatomy to household management, as many young people entered marriage with limited knowledge about either physical intimacy or domestic responsibilities. Wedding night customs varied dramatically by region and social class. Some communities practiced elaborate rituals designed to ensure fertility, blessing the marriage bed with herbs, performing ceremonial undressing, or conducting symbolic acts meant to encourage conception. These rituals were taken seriously and were believed to influence the success of the marriage. The physical consummation of marriage was not just a private matter between spouses. It had legal implications that concerned families and communities. Unconsummated marriages could be annulled, threatening carefully negotiated alliances and financial arrangements. Some families required proof of consummation, leading to customs that seem intrusive by modern standards. Privacy during the wedding night was often limited. In many households, the newlyweds might share living spaces with extended family members, making true privacy impossible. Some cultures had customs where community members would check on the couple or even remain nearby to ensure the marriage was properly consummated. Fear and anxiety were common experiences for both brides and grooms. Many young people entered marriage with limited knowledge about physical intimacy, and the pressure to successfully consummate the marriage while dealing with exhaustion from wedding celebrations could create significant stress. Some developed elaborate calming rituals or relied on herbal preparations to manage anxiety. Religious expectations about marriage night behavior created additional complexity. Church teachings emphasized that sexual activity should be focused on procreation rather than pleasure, while also recognizing that physical intimacy was necessary for valid marriage. Young couples had to navigate these competing messages while dealing with their own emotions and expectations. Morning after customs in many communities included verification rituals that confirmed the marriage had been consummated. These might include examination of bedding, formal declarations by the couple, or other practices designed to establish that the marriage was legally complete and binding. Failed wedding nights could have serious consequences. If consummation didn't occur, families might arrange for additional attempts, seek medical advice, or in extreme cases, consider annulment proceedings. The pressure to succeed could create cycles of anxiety that made success even more difficult. Cultural variations in wedding night expectations created interesting situations when people from different regions or social classes married. What seemed normal to one family might seem shocking or inappropriate to another, leading to conflicts that had to be negotiated carefully to avoid damaging new family relationships. Some couples developed strategies for managing wedding night pressures that prioritized building emotional intimacy alongside physical consummation. These couples might spend time talking, sharing fears and expectations, and developing comfort with each other before attempting physical intimacy. Medieval marriage troubles. Medieval marriages faced unique challenges that could make modern relationship problems seem simple by comparison. In a world where divorce was nearly impossible and marriage was primarily an economic arrangement, couples had to find ways to navigate conflicts that could last a lifetime. Infertility was perhaps the most serious problem a medieval marriage could face. Without children, particularly male heirs, marriages could be considered failures regardless of how well the couple got along personally. Infertility could lead to annulment proceedings, family pressure, and social disgrace that affected both spouses, but typically blamed women more harshly than men. Domestic violence was unfortunately common and was often tolerated or even legally sanctioned within certain limits. Husbands had legal authority over their wives that included physical discipline, though excessive violence could be prosecuted. Women had few legal remedies for abusive marriages and often had to rely on family intervention or religious authorities for protection. Financial disputes between spouses often reflected larger conflicts between their extended families. Disagreements about dowry management, inheritance rights, or household expenses could escalate into major family feuds that lasted for generations. Some couples found themselves trapped in marriages that were battlegrounds for larger economic conflicts. Adultery, while condemned by church and society, was not uncommon and was handled differently depending on the gender of the offending spouse. Male adultery was often tolerated or quietly ignored, while female adultery was considered a serious crime that could result in severe punishment or even death. These double standards created complex dynamics in marriages where infidelity occurred. Mental illness and personality disorders created challenges that medieval people had little capacity to understand or treat effectively. Couples dealing with what we would now recognize as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, or other mental health conditions had to rely on religious explanations and primitive treatments that often made problems worse. In-law conflicts were particularly problematic in medieval marriages where couples often lived with extended family members. Disputes between wives and mothers-in-law, conflicts over household authority, and disagreements about child-rearing could poison marriages and create lasting family divisions. Some couples discovered fundamental incompatibilities after marriage that made cohabitation difficult or impossible. Differences in personality, interests, or life goals that modern couples might resolve through divorce had to be endured permanently, leading to lifelong conflicts that affected entire families. Religious differences, while less common within regions, could create serious marital problems. Disputes over religious practices, donations to the church, or spiritual lifestyle choices could divide couples and create conflicts with religious authorities who expected unified family religious observance. Child-rearing disagreements became particularly acute in medieval families where children were economic assets and potential heirs. Disputes over education, marriage arrangements, or career paths for children could create lasting conflicts between parents and affect the entire family's future prosperity. Age differences, common in medieval marriages where economic considerations outweighed personal compatibility, could create unique challenges. Large age gaps between spouses could lead to different life stage priorities, health problems, or social awkwardness that affected the marriage relationship and family dynamics. Love potions and medieval romance magic. Medieval people believed deeply in the power of magic to influence romantic relationships, leading to a thriving underground economy of love potions, fertility charms, and relationship spells that promised to solve romantic problems through supernatural intervention. Love potion recipes were closely guarded secrets passed down through generations of wise women, herbalists, and folk healers. These concoctions typically combined herbs believed to have aphrodisiac properties with symbolic ingredients and elaborate preparation rituals. Common ingredients included mandrake root, vervain, and various flowers, mixed with wine, honey, or other carriers. The preparation of love magic often involved complex timing requirements based on lunar cycles, seasonal changes, and religious calendars. Practitioners believed that the effectiveness of romantic spells depended heavily on when they were prepared and administered, leading to elaborate scheduling that could take weeks or months to complete properly. Administration of love potions required careful planning and significant risk-taking. The magic had to be consumed by the intended target without their knowledge, leading to creative methods of delivery through food, drink, or other substances. Getting caught attempting to administer love magic could result in accusations of witchcraft, poisoning, or other serious crimes. Fertility magic was particularly important in a culture where producing heirs was crucial for family survival. Women used various charms, rituals, and potions designed to increase their chances of conception, while men might employ magic to enhance their virility and ensure their children would be male. Protective relationship magic was used by married couples to guard against adultery, divorce, or other threats to their marriages. These practices included wearing special amulets, performing household rituals, or using blessed objects to create spiritual protection around their relationships. Professional love magic practitioners operated in the shadows of medieval society, providing services to clients who were desperate enough to risk accusations of witchcraft. These specialists claimed expertise in various forms of romantic intervention, from simple attraction spells to complex curse removal and relationship repair work. Countermagic became necessary when love spells went wrong or when people suspected they were victims of romantic manipulation. Practitioners developed techniques for breaking love spells, protecting against unwanted magical attention, and reversing the effects of improperly administered love magic. Church opposition to love magic created interesting tensions between official religious teachings and popular practices. While the church condemned love magic as demonic, many people continued to use it, sometimes incorporating Christian prayers and symbols into their magical practices to make them seem more acceptable. The psychology of love magic was often more important than its actual effectiveness. People who believed they had consumed love potions might behave differently, while those who believed they were protected by relationship magic might feel more confident in their romantic pursuits. Legal consequences for love magic could be severe when practitioners were caught and prosecuted. Accusations of using love potions could lead to charges of witchcraft, poisoning, or fraud. Some love magic practitioners were executed, while others were banished or forced to perform public penance. Medieval divorce, when marriage goes wrong. While medieval marriage was designed to be permanent, reality often proved more complicated. The Church's prohibition of divorce led to creative legal and social solutions for couples trapped in failed marriages. Though these alternatives were expensive, complex, and available primarily to the wealthy, annulment was the primary legal mechanism for ending medieval marriages. Unlike divorce, which ended valid marriages, annulment declared that valid marriages had never existed due to technical defects in the original ceremony or relationship. Common grounds for annulment included consanguinity, being too closely related, prior existing marriages, coercion, or failure to consummate. The annulment process was lengthy and expensive, often requiring testimony from numerous witnesses, investigation by church officials, and complex legal proceedings that could last for years. Only wealthy families could afford the costs associated with annulment proceedings, making it effectively unavailable to common people. Consanguinity rules provided the most common grounds for annulment among the nobility. The Church prohibited marriages between relatives within 7 degrees of kinship, later reduced to 4. But these rules were often ignored during marriage negotiations and only invoked later when couples wanted to end their marriages. Separation was available as an alternative to annulment for couples who could prove grounds like adultery, extreme cruelty, or apostasy. Legally separated couples remained married and could not remarry, but they could live apart and manage their properties independently. Fraudulent annulments were common among wealthy families who could afford to manufacture evidence or bribe church officials. Some couples colluded to create false grounds for annulment, while others used political influence to pressure religious authorities into granting favorable rulings. Abandoned spouses faced particularly difficult situations when their partners disappeared without formal legal proceedings. Women whose husbands left for war, pilgrimage, or trade and never returned often spent years in legal limbo, unable to remarry but also unable to support themselves independently. Second marriages after successful annulments or separations were carefully scrutinized by both church and secular authorities. These marriages required special permissions and documentation to ensure they were legally valid and wouldn't be challenged later by interested parties. The economic consequences of marriage dissolution were often more important than the emotional ones. Property divisions, custody arrangements, and financial support obligations had to be negotiated carefully to avoid creating lasting conflicts between families. Social stigma attached to marriage dissolution affected both spouses but typically impacted women more severely. Divorced or separated women faced questions about their virtue, their role in the marriage failure, and their suitability for future relationships. Children from dissolved marriages faced particular challenges regarding legitimacy, inheritance rights, and social status. The Church's position that annulled marriages had never been valid could technically render children illegitimate, though this rule was often modified to protect children's interests. Regional variations in medieval romance. Medieval Europe was not a uniform culture, and romantic customs varied dramatically from region to region based on climate, economic systems, religious traditions, and cultural influences from neighboring civilizations. Understanding these variations helps explain why medieval romance took so many different forms. Mediterranean regions, influenced by contact with Islamic and Byzantine cultures, developed more elaborate courtship rituals and greater tolerance for romantic expression. The troubadour tradition originated in southern France and spread throughout the Mediterranean, creating cultures where romantic poetry, music, and elaborate courtship displays were valued and cultivated. Northern European regions, with their harsh climates and agricultural focus, developed more practical approaches to romance and marriage. Scandinavian countries had unique traditions around bride capture and trial marriages, while Germanic regions emphasized family alliances and economic considerations in marriage arrangements. Island cultures like those in Britain and Ireland developed distinctive romantic traditions influenced by Celtic mythology and maritime lifestyles. Irish traditions included elaborate elopement customs and seasonal marriage contracts, while English customs emphasized elaborate wedding processions and community celebrations. Urban areas across Europe developed different romantic cultures from rural regions. Cities provided more opportunities for young people to meet and interact, leading to more varied courtship practices and sometimes more freedom in marriage choice. Urban craft guilds often had specific traditions around marriage within their professions. Border regions where different cultures met often developed hybrid romantic traditions that combined elements from multiple cultures. The Iberian Peninsula, for example, blended Christian, Islamic, and Jewish marriage customs, creating unique practices that differed significantly from other European regions. Trade route regions were influenced by contact with distant cultures and exotic goods that could be incorporated into romantic gestures and wedding celebrations. Venice, Constantinople, and other major trading centers developed cosmopolitan romantic cultures that incorporated influences from across the known world. Mountain regions developed practical romantic traditions suited to harsh environments and isolated communities. Alpine communities often had seasonal courtship patterns tied to agricultural cycles and weather patterns that made travel and celebration difficult during winter months. Forest regions developed romantic traditions that incorporated woodland resources and seasonal cycles. Germanic and Slavic cultures had distinctive traditions around seasonal festivals, forest spirits, and natural symbols that influenced their approaches to courtship and marriage. Religious center regions were influenced by monastic traditions and clerical perspectives on marriage and romance. Areas around major monasteries or religious centers often had more conservative romantic customs and stricter oversight of courtship behaviors. Frontier regions where medieval expansion was occurring developed practical romantic customs suited to unsettled conditions. These areas often had more flexible marriage customs and greater tolerance for unconventional relationships due to the practical necessities of frontier life. Royal court regions developed elaborate romantic traditions influenced by aristocratic lifestyles and political considerations. Court cultures created sophisticated systems of courtship that emphasized ceremony, display, and the integration of romance with political and social ambitions. The economics of medieval singlehood. Being single in medieval society wasn't just a personal choice. It was an economic status that affected everything from where you could live to what occupations you could pursue. Understanding the economics of singlehood helps explain why marriage was considered so essential and why remaining unmarried required careful planning and resources. Single women faced the most severe economic restrictions. Unmarried women had limited legal rights to own property, conduct business, or live independently. Most single women lived with relatives, worked as servants, or entered religious life as their only options for economic survival. The few who managed independent livelihoods often faced social suspicion and economic discrimination. Professional opportunities for single women were largely limited to certain trades and occupations. Brewing, textile work, and small-scale commerce provided some opportunities for independent income, but these were often precarious and subject to guild restrictions that favored married men or widows over never-married women. Single men had more economic options but still faced significant challenges. Bachelor taxes in some regions penalized unmarried men financially, while social pressures to marry often came with economic incentives that made marriage financially advantageous. Single men were often excluded from certain guild positions or civic roles that were reserved for married householders. Housing arrangements for single people were complicated and expensive. Single individuals rarely lived alone but instead boarded with families, lived in religious institutions, or shared accommodations with other single people. These arrangements provided little privacy and often came with restrictions on behavior and social activities. Inheritance patterns often disadvantaged single people, particularly women. Unmarried daughters might receive smaller inheritances than their married sisters, while single sons might face pressure to marry to secure their full inheritances. These inheritance patterns reinforced social pressures to marry and made long-term singlehood economically difficult. Religious life provided an alternative economic model for single people, though it required giving up personal wealth and independence. Monasteries and convents offered economic security in exchange for vows of celibacy, poverty, and obedience. For some people, particularly younger sons and daughters from wealthy families, religious life provided better economic prospects than secular singlehood. Widowhood created a unique economic category for people who had been married but were now single again. Widows often had more economic rights and opportunities than never-married women, as they could inherit their deceased husband's property and businesses. Some widows became quite wealthy and powerful, controlling significant resources and even remarrying strategically to enhance their economic positions. Guild membership rules often discriminated against single people, particularly in occupations where family connections and household stability were considered important for business success. Single craftsmen might be excluded from certain positions or face restrictions on taking apprentices, while single women were often prohibited from joining guilds entirely. Tax systems in many medieval societies penalized single people through bachelor taxes, higher property assessments, or exclusion from certain tax benefits available to married householders. These financial penalties were designed to encourage marriage and discourage long-term singlehood as socially disruptive. Single people often faced higher costs for basic necessities because they couldn't benefit from the economies of scale that marriage provided. Food, housing, clothing, and other essentials were more expensive per person when purchased by individuals rather than families, making single life economically inefficient. Love letters and secret communications. In a world where literacy was limited and privacy was scarce, love letters represented the pinnacle of romantic sophistication. These carefully crafted messages were dangerous, precious, and often the only way for separated lovers to maintain their connections across time and distance. Writing love letters required not just literacy but also knowledge of appropriate romantic language and literary conventions. Most people who could write learned formal, business-like styles that were poorly suited to expressing romantic feelings. Lovers had to develop new vocabularies and styles specifically for romantic correspondence. The physical creation of love letters was expensive and time-consuming. Paper was costly, ink had to be prepared, and the actual writing process required good lighting and considerable time. Each letter represented a significant investment of resources that demonstrated the writer's serious romantic intentions. Delivery of love letters required trusted intermediaries who could maintain secrecy while ensuring messages reached their intended recipients. Servants, friends, or professional messengers might be employed, but each additional person in the communication chain increased the risk of discovery and scandal. Coding and encryption became necessary when love letters contained sensitive information or when discovery would have serious consequences. Lovers developed personal codes, used classical references that only educated recipients would understand, or employed elaborate metaphors that disguised their true meanings from casual readers. Love letters often included physical tokens, pressed flowers, locks of hair, or small gifts that enhanced the emotional impact of written words. These additions made letters more meaningful but also more dangerous if discovered, as they provided physical evidence of romantic relationships. Reading love letters was a social activity in households where privacy was limited. Recipients might need to find secure locations and appropriate times to read their correspondence without observation. Some lovers developed signals or meeting places where they could safely exchange and read letters. Preserving love letters presented security challenges for people who wanted to keep romantic correspondence but feared discovery. Some lovers developed hiding places or gave letters to trusted friends for safekeeping. Others destroyed letters immediately after reading to prevent evidence of their relationships from being discovered. The emotional impact of love letters was intensified by the effort and risk required to create and deliver them. Receiving a love letter demonstrated that someone was willing to invest significant time, money, and risk to communicate their feelings, making the letters themselves romantic gestures beyond their written contents. Failed love letters, those that were intercepted, misdelivered, or discovered by disapproving authorities, could have serious consequences ranging from family disgrace to broken engagements to accusations of improper behavior that could affect future marriage prospects. Professional letter writers sometimes offered their services to illiterate lovers who wanted to send romantic correspondence. These scribes had to be trusted with intimate secrets and often developed specializations in romantic writing styles and conventions. Medieval marriage counseling. When medieval marriages encountered problems, couples couldn't turn to professional therapists or marriage counselors. Instead, they relied on a network of religious authorities, family elders, and community mediators who offered practical guidance based on traditional wisdom and religious teachings. Priests provided the closest equivalent to modern marriage counseling, offering guidance based on Christian teachings about marriage and family relationships. They emphasized duties, obligations, and spiritual approaches to resolving conflicts, though their training was theological rather than psychological. Family elders, particularly mothers and grandmothers, served as informal marriage counselors for younger couples experiencing difficulties. These older women had extensive experience with marriage challenges and could offer practical advice about managing household conflicts, dealing with financial stress, and maintaining family harmony. Community mediators, often respected older couples or local leaders, sometimes intervened in marriage disputes that threatened to disrupt community harmony. These informal counselors focused on practical solutions and community stability rather than individual emotional satisfaction. Religious confessions provided opportunities for individuals to discuss marriage problems with priests in private settings. While the focus was on sin and forgiveness rather than relationship improvement, confession sometimes served therapeutic functions for people dealing with marriage stress. Seasonal festivals and community gatherings provided informal opportunities for couples to observe other marriages and learn from their examples. Public celebrations allowed couples to see how others handled relationship challenges and might seek advice from couples they admired. Pilgrimage journeys were sometimes undertaken by couples seeking to resolve marriage problems through spiritual intervention. These shared challenging experiences could provide opportunities for couples to rebuild their relationships while seeking divine guidance for their difficulties. Guild organizations sometimes provided support for marriage problems among their members, particularly when domestic conflicts threatened business relationships or community harmony. Guild leaders might intervene in disputes between married members to maintain organizational stability. Herbal remedies and folk cures were sometimes employed to address what were believed to be medical causes of marriage problems. Practitioners might recommend treatments for impotence, infertility, or mood disorders that were thought to contribute to marital discord. Legal authorities occasionally became involved in marriage counseling when domestic disputes threatened public order or when serious abuse was reported. However, legal intervention was typically focused on maintaining social stability rather than improving relationship quality. Monastic communities sometimes provided marriage guidance for secular couples, drawing on their communal living experiences and spiritual training. Monks and nuns who had experience managing community conflicts could offer insights applicable to marriage relationships. The end of medieval romance. As the medieval period drew to a close, changing social, economic, and cultural conditions began to transform romantic relationships in ways that would eventually lead to modern concepts of love, marriage, and individual choice in relationships. Renaissance humanism introduced new ideas about individual worth and personal fulfillment that challenged traditional medieval approaches to marriage as primarily economic and social arrangements. These philosophical changes laid groundwork for later emphasis on romantic love as a legitimate basis for marriage. Economic changes, including the growth of merchant classes and urban centers, created new opportunities for young people to meet, interact, and develop relationships outside traditional family-controlled arrangements. Increased social mobility allowed some people to marry across class lines that would have been impossible in earlier medieval periods. Protestant Reformation ideas about marriage as a spiritual partnership rather than just a social contract began to influence Northern European approaches to romantic relationships. Reformed churches emphasized mutual affection and compatibility alongside economic and social considerations. Printing press technology made romantic literature more widely available, spreading new ideas about love and relationships throughout European society. Popular books and pamphlets began to influence how ordinary people thought about romance and marriage. Colonial expansion and global trade created new social mixing as people from different regions and cultures came into contact. These interactions sometimes led to romantic relationships that crossed cultural boundaries and challenged traditional marriage customs. Scientific revolution thinking began to influence how people understood human emotions and relationships. While still limited, early psychological insights began to compete with purely religious or traditional explanations for romantic attraction and marriage compatibility. Legal system changes gradually expanded individual rights and reduced family control over marriage decisions. While still limited, these legal changes created more opportunities for young people to influence their own romantic futures. Women's economic opportunities slowly expanded in some regions and occupations, providing alternatives to marriage as the only path to economic security. These changes allowed some women greater choice in marriage timing and partner selection. Cultural exchange through trade, diplomacy, and religious missions introduced European societies to different approaches to romance and marriage from other civilizations. These cultural contacts sometimes influenced local customs and created new hybrid practices. Conclusion: love in the time of chivalry. As we close this journey through medieval romance, it's worth remembering that love, in all its messy complexity, has always been part of the human experience. Medieval people may not have had dating apps or relationship advice columns, but they faced the same fundamental challenges we do: finding compatible partners, maintaining relationships through difficulties, and balancing personal desires with practical necessities. Their solutions were different from ours: more family involvement, less individual choice, and significantly more economic calculation. But beneath the arranged marriages and dowry negotiations, real people were falling in love, dealing with heartbreak, and trying to build meaningful relationships within the constraints of their world. Medieval romance reminds us that love is always shaped by its historical context. What seems romantic in one era might seem oppressive in another. What appears practical to one generation might seem cold to the next. Understanding these historical variations helps us appreciate both the universal human need for connection and the diverse ways that need has been expressed and fulfilled. Perhaps most importantly, medieval romance shows us that people have always been creative in their pursuit of love. Whether through coded messages and love letters, elaborate courtship rituals, or complex family negotiations, medieval people found ways to honor both their hearts and their circumstances. Their legacy lives on in our literature, our rituals, and our continued belief that love, however we define it, is worth pursuing. The medieval bride walking to church in her finest dress, the young man composing poetry for his beloved, and the families negotiating marriage contracts were all participating in the same human drama that continues today. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps with a partner you chose freely and married for love, remember those medieval couples who found happiness within arranged marriages, who discovered love despite family opposition, and who proved that the human heart finds a way, regardless of the century. Their stories remind us that love, like humanity itself, endures. It adapts to new circumstances, finds expression within whatever constraints exist, and continues to inspire, frustrate, and ultimately fulfill us, just as it did in the Middle Ages and just as it will for generations to come. Sweet dreams and